Hey, everybody. My guest on this lovely Friday morning here in the Northeast is Randi Casey. Randi is the senior vice president, and I'm going to hope to get this right. Goldsteins, Rosenberg's, Raphael-Sacks funeral home. I think I got that right. Yes, you heard it here. Funeral home. This is the first for the show. I'm going to be interviewing somebody who deals in grieving and coffins and being with families and loss and joy and celebration, all those things. Randi, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. When just to set this up for the audience, when I found out about Randi, I wanted to interview you for two specific reasons. One, and like I just mentioned, I've never had anybody to talk about this specific topic on the show, and it's obviously a topic that we all deal with. And someday we will deal with for ourselves. Well, we won't deal with a topic when it happens to us. We won't care at that point. But we deal with it for that. Aging parents, people lose people unexpectedly. So I thought it was important to get your expertise and talk about what we as the public may not know. And the second thing that you're going to talk to us about that's really interesting is you're a third generation family owned business and bringing the fourth generation into the business, which is very, very rare.
Very.
Either the families can't get along, or they get bought out, or they say, we don't want to do this anymore, anything in between. And you've managed to make that happen. So we're going to talk about both those topics today. Before we do that, Randi, where are you in the world? And what would you like to know about us generally, us to know about you generally?
Currently right now in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I live right outside of Philly. Know about me, I've been working in the family funeral home business since I was 18. I've been licensed since I was 25. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but a long time. I have two daughters. One of them is actually currently working here and is going to start mortuary school in the fall and come in the business. My other daughter wants nothing to do with this and is a black belt and teaches karate.
Yeah, karate and funeral homes. I like that. Interesting. So you're originally from the Philadelphia area?
Born and raised right outside of Philly, even though I have a very strong Philly accent. I really didn't grow up in Philadelphia per se, but
yeah,
Philly through Philly sports fan, Philly everything.
Yeah, we won't talk about Philly sports.
Yeah, we won't go there if you're a New Yorker.
Well, no, I'm actually not a New Yorker. I'm from Minnesota originally, so there's a whole different level of.
Minnesota.
Yeah, well, I just have to say, as to give you a little ribbing, is my whole family is from Kansas, so I'm a Chiefs fan. So
okay.
I'll leave it at that. You take that for what it will. That was exciting.
We'll get over it.
That Super Bowl was a long time ago. Randi, so let's start with what you do. So here, a funeral home. I would assert that most people have been to a funeral at a funeral home. And what are all the things that funeral homes do? Because I've never had to plan one. I've been to some of my grandparents and such, but I've never been responsible for all the details. What are all the things that when somebody calls you and says, hey, this person's passed away, we want to use your services, what are all the things that you provide to that family or those people booking the services?
Basically, we start the process of figuring out what type of service they want to have, whether they want to have a funeral in one of our facilities. We have two locations, one in Philadelphia proper and one out in Bucks County, which is about 25 minutes from where we are located right now. Or if they want to do a service at a cemetery, everything out there, or other locations such as a church, a synagogue. I mean, we're primarily a Jewish funeral home, but
so non-denominational. Anybody who, yeah, excellent.
We, then walk the family through the whole process, what they need to bring to us, the information we need to file. We take care of filing death certificates for the families, getting them the certified copies they need so they can take care of everything after the fact. We take care of coordinating with the cemetery and whatever clergy to get all the timing done. We prepare the body, wash, dress, casket, all that stuff. Take the body eventually to the cemetery or crematory, depending on what option they choose. And then we do follow-up. We do aftercare, which is basically checking in with the family, seeing how they're doing, see if they need support group help, that kind of stuff. We also send them, in the Jewish religion, there's a thing where you honor your loved one's death every year. you light a candle. And that is called, it's the annual York site, which is the Hebrew word for it. And we send out reminders to all our families, either via regular mail or email, and we do that for free for every single family that we serve. Plus, if anyone wants to get them and we didn't serve them, we do a gratis one for them too. Like anyone can call us. Everything we did, plus, run the funeral, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. So as somebody who hasn't planned a funeral, something happens, I need to use the services. We call, say, we need to do a service. At that point, you're going to walk me through everything I need to do. So I don't need much, but I would assert there are some things that I need to give you that in the midst of the grieving process are probably not quite so, like, I just know that I've heard this from a lot of people, especially when things happen unexpectedly, that they struggle with getting some of the things because it's overwhelmed. It's like they're overwhelmed. So I'd love to hear from your perspective on the side of, I wouldn't even begin to imagine how many services and families you've served. Like, what are some of the things that you will ask for?
So one of the things that we need right off the bat is what we call vital statistical information from the family. Mm-hmm. That's what we need for the death certificate. And that's where, depending on who we're talking to of the next of kin, they don't always have all the information. So we need the decedent's legal address. We need if they were married, their maiden name, married, widow, divorced, whatever their marital status is, their highest level of education, what they did for an occupation in one industry, because you cannot put retired on a death certificate, at least in the state of Pennsylvania. I can only
really?
Yeah.
You have to go by the last profession they had? Interesting.
Well, not the last. It's technically what they did the longest.
Really? Oh, interesting.
Or we put, honestly, if they never worked and it's a woman, which is not as, it's more on today that women don't work, but as we do with elderly women, we put homemaker.
Yeah, sure.
And then we do, we need, if they were a veteran, if their spouse was a veteran, the next of kin, obviously, we need their parents' names, including, which is a tough one, is that not many know off the top of their head, if it's not a spouse, is the decedent's social security number. We notify social security, plus you need it on the death certificate. Yeah,
I was going to ask you that from I know that on your taxes, it'll have you had anybody pass away, like, right. The only way to do that is through your social security number. And so that is part of the process that you'll file that with. That's part of like the process is filing that with the IRS and with the state so that.
Right.
And then like when we're doing our taxes, I still need to check that box or whatever, but it's a thing that's already been filed with the government.
So when someone dies, we're required by law to notify Social Security, like with a form. So one of the things that we tell families is if there's a recent tax return for the decedent, that's where their Social Security number will be. Yeah. But some people, elderly people, don't all file taxes. They don't have anything to file.
Sure.
So really, if you're taking care of a loved one, parent, aunt, great grandparent, you really, if they're coherent, should get that information ahead of time so that you have it, because you're going to need it. You're going to need that Social Security number. The other stuff, like the mother's maiden name, you can always put unknown. It's not an important spot on a death certificate, but date of birth, date of death, the person's legal name, not their nickname, their legal name that's on their Social Security, and their Social Security number are the most important things that you need on a death certificate. Yeah. So that's a big deal. And like before we file a death certificate, we send information either via DocuSign, or if the family's sitting in front of us, we have them go over what we wrote down to make sure it's all correct, and they sign off on it.
Yeah,
because it's major.
Yeah, and I was thinking in the midst of one of the most challenging times in people's lives is that you then like the idea of getting a lot of information. That's probably not something that some people even have the capacity to do at that time.
Depending on the situation, you're absolutely right. Like it's very hard. Sometimes it takes a day or two, which is why, look, you can't prepare for unexpected death. But if you know someone is getting up in age, or you just want to take care of stuff for yourself so that your children don't have to be burdened with it, we do a thing called pre-arranging a funeral, which is put a funeral or a funeral for a loved one together ahead of time, so that it's
my grandfather did that. Yeah,
It's a
because
gift.
he was basically, he was 91, and my grandmother had passed away, and he had basically told my mom, I'm not really interested in being here anymore. Like, you know, he was depressed, and he was
Mhm.
on drugs that were keeping him alive. And he said, this is what I want, and this is how I want to do it. And it was easy for us as a family because he was cremated, and we knew that. And he was also very responsible and was an accountant. So he actually had all of that information that made it very easy for my mother and father to take care of that, which is a real blessing. On the other side, of my family, it was not quite the case and created a lot of problems.
We deal with a lot of problems with
We'll
families.
deal with a lot of problems. Yeah.
It's really funny when you sit on my side of the table and a family goes to you. I bet you never sat in front of a more dysfunctional family, and I'm like, really want to play
Yeah.
this game?
You're like, I am the SVP here. I'm also a therapist.
I equate ourselves to like bartenders and hairstylists. Like you hear
Yeah,
everyone.
totally. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You probably, yeah. You probably had some families where you're like, now you're going to stay in the lobby and we're going to meet with this group of people. And then we're going to switch because you all can't be in the same room together.
We have a lot of families that like they'll say to us, can so and so not come to the funeral? And I'm like, the only way you can do that is if you keep it private. Like we can't really it's a public
Yeah.
building. We can't tell them they
It's a
can't
public
come in the
building.
building. But we can say the service is private and not give out any information. Basically, whoever signs our contract is who we're in contract with, so we'll abide by whatever their wishes. But
Sure.
it's tough. Like it really becomes an issue when it's a second marriage sometimes, and the
Oh,
children
God.
don't
Yeah.
like the second spouse,
I can imagine.
or just siblings don't get along.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, everyone has, or not everyone, most people have one of those siblings in their life.
Yeah. I know many people that do. What I would like to talk now about it's a regulated industry, I believe, by the state. It's a state regulate. It's regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. Are there additional laws in each state, or is it really just the FTC?
FTC basically oversees everything. There are some state variations, like in Pennsylvania, we're what you would call a majority rule state. So what that means is that if someone asks for cremation and there's no spouse, the person's already widowed who died, and they have 3 children, 2 out of 3 have to be in agreement with the cremation. Now, us personally, we try and get all 3 signatures, so nothing comes down. Cremation's a final act. You can't fix it once it happens. So everyone's got to be on the same page, because once it's done, like if you bury someone in a grave and they want to move them, you can always bring a casket up. It costs money, but it can be done. You can't fix a cremation. So that's one of the biggest differences. The Federal Trade Commission got involved in our industry because funeral homes were price gouging. They would put everything into the casket price, but they would, bump it up so much that it was just astronomical. But since the FTC got involved, it's actually a little more expensive for consumers because we had to break down everything.
Yeah. So now it's this service, it's an invoice with each of the things as opposed to
everything. I mean, you can do packaging in the state of Pennsylvania, but as of right now, we're in the process of starting that with our funeral.
Yeah.
But right now, everything's a la carte and everything has to have a price.
Yeah.
Now, whether we choose to discount something or not, that's up to us. But everything on our general price list has to be marked.
Price fixing is obviously illegal. I would imagine that's probably a thing that's happened in the past in an industry like this.
That mistreatment of the decedent. I'm sure you've heard of, all those horrible things that hit the nightly news.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why the government and the states are involved, to avoid that.
Yeah.
For the most part, like in this area we've been in business since 1940 something. Rosenberg started in the late 1800s. So none of us have ever been cited or had a problem or anything. So
yeah,
we're pretty lucky that way.
Yeah, it's great, Randy. And let's see, the last question I had about the specific industry. Oh, I had something else, but I may have just lost it. I'll come back to it if I come to it. Let's take a pause on me peppering you with questions and give you a chance to ask me anything you want. We met about 27 minutes ago. So you know a little bit about me, not as much as we know about you at this point. So what would you like to ask me that I can answer for you and for the audience?
Well, out of curiosity, what did you do before you did this podcast?
Yeah, before I did this podcast, I do this podcast as one of the many things I do.
Okay.
Fun. For those who are not in the podcasting industry, being a professional podcaster is not a profession that many people can make a good living doing. It's just a very, you have to have a big show, like big. What I did before I kind of like built my own little thing over here at the podcast, and my business is I was in sales, and I worked for some tech companies. So I worked at a couple of big telecom companies early in my career. Then I went over to the startup world and did some sales and technical sales and ran a team. And then I decided to do my own thing.
How'd you get into this though? Like what made you want to do this?
The podcast specifically, when I was a kid, I loved the Tonight Show. And I didn't know, like when you're a kid, you don't know that those are kind of scripted in a way. Like this is a really unscripted conversation other than like, hey, let's talk about this. But what I didn't realize as a kid, because why would I, is that, and back then this was Johnny Carson and then became Jay Leno, because that was when I was 12, is they have this manager or agent who walks in and says, all right, so you're going to interview Randi today. And Randi's on tour for her new movie. So you need to ask her these 5 questions. And it needs to sound conversational, but we need to make sure we handle these 5 things. This is why we have Randi on the press tour and taken away from their thing. And so 4 years ago, when I started working for myself, I said, I can do this. Like starting a podcast is not a high bar. I mean, you just need to be able to record something and find people you want to talk to and interview them and record it and release it. So this is my own little way of fulfilling this is my therapeutic inner child thing where I get to actually do the thing that I was interested in when I was a kid. I mean, that's actually, it's funny you asked that because people go, if you could do anything, what would you do? I would actually want to be a talk show host, like like a Piers Morgan or, like Larry King, like interview, not Howard's. I don't mind Howard, but I like to have more conversations like this. I would not want to be like a news anchor who's like, today we have Randi and she's going to talk about the funeral industry and what's going on. That's more like Piers Morgan, how Larry King used to have interesting people and just have long form conversations. And I would love to be the host of the Tonight Show, but I think Jimmy has a little bit stronger resume at this point. I would like the pay. I would like to meet those guests, but this is my own little way of having some fun with it. So yeah, thanks for the question. Sure. All right. So what's that?
How do you get your guests?
Oh yeah. I find them. Yeah. So anybody listening, whoever wants to come on here, if you go to my website, I have a little form. And how you and I met is I have a whole bunch of PR people who send me interesting people. And I say, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to interview this person. So I have some people reach out proactively. I have some people that I interview that I know very well. I interviewed my wife. That was not a hard interview to get.
I imagine not.
Well, then maybe it was, but then she interviewed me at the beginning of this year. Some of the people I know really well, it's as simple as, okay, when are you coming on? Other people I don't know until we show up, who come in from other places. And it's really fun because it's a nice way to get to meet people. Like you and I would probably never connect otherwise. I mean, we could, but if I just reach out and I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about the funeral industry? Be like, why? Well, I mean, sure, but why? So now it's a great way for me. It's a really fun way to meet literally cool people. And I get to learn a ton. I mean, one of the benefits of being a podcast host of a style like this, I get to learn. I'm learning from you right now. The questions I'm asking you, I don't know the answer to any of these. That's why I'm asking. Because I would assert that most of the audience doesn't know either and is interested. That's why they're listening to this episode. Or people that are in the funeral industry might want to go, man, Randi's been doing it a long time. How does she see the industry? She's an expert. She's been around a long time. Yeah. So that's it. Thanks. A cool question. I like that. Let's talk about family-owned businesses. Randi's got a nice big smile. Randi's got a nice big smile on her face now. Let's start with you. Well, let's start with you. But the first question is, when did you know that you were going to be involved in the family business?
So when I graduated high school, I was fortunate to get a job. So, of course, this was my dad, who was one of the principals at the time. And I worked at funeral home. I worked as an admin, a secretary, basically.
Mhm.
Never thought I was going to end up coming in that. I went to college. I have a bachelor's in English. I could actually go and teach English, or I thought
Yeah.
I'd be a writer, anything like that. Like didn't think I'd come in. But the more I worked here and the more I saw the interactions and what we did, it kind of intrigued me. So when I
Yeah.
graduated from Temple University, I decided to go on to mortuary school, and I did really well in mortuary school. I actually really liked the working with the decedents, doing the embalmings and stuff. I thought that was really fascinating and
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't really love at the time dealing with the actual families because, I was 25 and it was daunting to deal with families, especially at
Yeah.
their worst. But then, as you get used to it and you start doing it, it becomes easier and you get better at it. And I
Yeah.
actually went and got certified many moons ago. I don't currently have a certification. I haven't had time to go back and recertify, but I became a bereavement facilitator, which really helps dealing with families. You really learn how to talk to people and
Yep.
again, just listening and learning, you pick up a lot from your family members that have been doing it for a long time. Like I have very good role models to follow, but it was not on my radar when I was 18. By the time I was 25, I was licensed, and I liked it. I liked what I was doing. Now working with family, that's a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into the dynamics of working with family, and obviously you can only speak inside of the context of working with your family. I have some general questions I'm curious about. Number one, pay. Getting paid. It would seem to me, I'm a father. I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. It would seem that if my daughter was going to work for me, I'd want to make sure she was well taken care of because she's my daughter. I'm so curious how it goes around. We don't need to talk specific numbers, but like the conversation, because in a normal business, it's like this job pays $40,000. And when you're talking about doing business with your family, you may know that $40,000 isn't actually quite enough to have them pay off student loans, or, that let's put it, I don't know if this happened to you all, but man, I think about it. Your son or daughter is in your business and they get pregnant. You're like, oh, we're going to have a grandkid. That's amazing. And then you're like, but wait, grandkids cost money and you work for me. So no specifics, obviously it's private, but I'm so curious about the conversation around pay when it's a family owned business and you're part of the family running the business, how the pay works. Is it more of a profit sharing structure? Is it just, you're just paid like a normal employee? You have a set salary with, try to keep it fair, and then like the normal pay raises like you would in any business?
So we're 100% salaried if you're a family member.
Yep.
We're not hourly. You come in, they tell you what you're going to get paid, and you don't say a word.
You don't say a word.
Working as an admin or working as like guys who are unlicensed before they get their funeral home license, they're going out and doing the removals, getting the bodies into our care and that kind of stuff, working the
Sure.
funeral on the floor and whatever. Once we get licensed and we're apprenticing everyone, but it's a different jump. Obviously, if you're a family member versus an employee, you get a bump up. Once you're licensed, you get a bump up. And then, when the generation before me was still in charge, my dad, my uncle, and two of my cousins, they made the top, and then a bunch of us were underneath. But I was under my cousins because I'm younger. I came in later, so
Sure.
we didn't all catch up to each other until recently, like within the last 5 or 10 years. I was always getting a lot less than them, but I worked a very different schedule than them because when I got licensed, I was married.
Mm-hmm.
And then like a year or two later, I got pregnant with my first child. We worked a 6-day week. We didn't have a choice. That's what we worked, and that was it. We now work a 5-day week. We've kind of changed it, but back then it was 6 days. So when my daughter was born, my dad and my uncle were in the hospital visiting me, and I said, by the way, adjust my pay accordingly. I'm going down to 5 days.
And like reduce my pay.
basically.
Yep.
And I was the second girl in the business. Like we're a male dominated family. There's more girls now below me, but not above me.
Yeah.
And I took the pay cut because I wanted to be home one day a week with my child. Then when my second daughter was born 3 years later, I said, adjust my pay again accordingly because I'm going down to 4 days. And I did that for 3 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, it hurt financially, but I wouldn't trade the time that I had with my kids.
Yeah, of
So then I
course.
came back to 6 days and then, or no, I came back to 5 days. But again, I got paid less than that
Yeah.
because I wasn't working the 6 days, which was fair. You know, it was
Yeah.
still, and then now, you know, as my kids got older, that adjusted and I came back full time. But
Sure.
I wanted to be around for my kids. And as a working mom, it's, it's different in
Yeah.
my,
Yeah. Thanks,
so,
Randy.
but the way like salaries work, like in the industry, when you're a family owned business and you're a family member, you're not paid what the industry is paid. Like it's adjusted. It depends on, and it depends on the business. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're a big funeral home, we do okay. So, you know, our salaries are different. So,
Yeah.
but we also top out. You know, you get to a certain point, you're done. So,
Yeah. I guess the profit margin, you've hit the profit margin where you need to maintain the, yeah.
yeah.
The other question I had that popped in around family owned businesses is how to deal with the dynamic of having employees that are not part of the family working with people that are the family. In other words, nepotism. I'm sure I'm sure nepotism happens, but I'm sure it also doesn't happen. But I would also guess that many times, using my common sense here, you would have employees that might be unhappy with something else. And they would blame it on, well, you're part of the double standard, or, well, my daughter works for me is different than this person off the street working for me. I don't have the same connection. How do you handle that as an employer?
It's tough because a lot of us have children now working in the business, and you do want to protect your child from anything, and you know, like make sure they're okay. But you also have to be fair and be an employer. We do try and treat all of our employees like family. Hence, we try and keep the family-run business mode. But the bigger you get, the more generations you get, it's hard. Like you still have to run like a corporation. You still have to run it like a business.
Yeah.
It creates problems. It creates problems between us owners because you see someone protecting their child and you get annoyed. Like,
Yeah,
well, they
I'll bet.
get yelled at, disciplined, whatever. Like
Yeah.
it becomes difficult. But basically, you either confront it or you bite your tongue and just let it go and move on to the next thing. It really depends on what it is and who you're going up against, and you know, it's tough. And it's very tough to, you know, watch someone else come down on your child when you don't agree with what they're coming down on them for, too. So,
yeah. They call
yeah.
that the mama bear or papa bear syndrome. You're like, don't be messing with
Well, I'm a big mama bear because I'm a single parent and I've been a single parent for a while now, and don't mess with my kids.
Yeah.
And again, I'm the first one to yell at them when they screw up. So I don't play that game. So
No, you're like, listen, you all over there, you don't need to come down on my kids. I'm coming down on them. Like, I'm gonna do it. It's good.
My girls will tell you that too. They're
Yeah,
like,
I'm sure they will. Yeah. The last question I had is around how do you not bring it home all the time? Since there's such a shared context. Like said, if you're married, if you like when you're, you know, if I don't know if your girls are at home with you now or not, but like when you're working in a business together, I would imagine it could be very hard to just come home and be like, we're not going to talk about work. Because like a lot of, like, I know my wife and I, we talk about what we do, but we don't work in the same field. So it's like actually connection time. You're already doing that all day when you're working together. So how do you have any like unsaid rules, or how do you manage that so it's not all consuming at home as well?
So my one child that works in the business does not live with me, but still we're family, so we're together a lot, you know, outside. Yeah. One of the things that I really pride myself on and my family on is we can fight amongst ourselves brutally in the office, when we're all out together, we are as thick as thieves. We're the same feeling that blood is thicker than water. So we can say something about each other, but you better not.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
pretty thick that way. When I lived at home with my parents and I was working for my dad, that got dicey at times because, my mother had an opinion and she didn't work here, but she always had an opinion. And that was kind
Oh
of like,
boy.
yeah, that was tough. But that's why like we leave it at work. Like
Yeah.
my dad and my uncle used to fight with their father to the point of my grandparents lived above the funeral home. So we would come
Mm.
here for like Friday night dinners or holidays or whatever, and Papa and my uncle and my father would be downstairs in the office, which is way below where I am right now. Where I am right now used to be an apartment.
Yeah.
And we'd be upstairs. We'd have the TV on, watching TV as kids. I think I was maybe 5, 6 years old. My brothers are each 2 years older and 2 years older than that. And we could hear them yelling, like
Yikes.
raising the roof over something with work, the three of them. And we would start laughing and we're like, Dad's getting yelled at. But then they'd come upstairs and have dinner like nothing ever happened.
That's a skill.
Technically you leave it in the office. That was how we were brought up. Like,
yeah.
We watched it. So, that's another thing. Like growing up in this business and knowing, is one thing, but when your grandparents live above it and you're here a lot, like we used to go downstairs after dinner and there was a night crew that works for us. We still have a night crew. And my 2 cousins on the other side of the family from my great uncle's side and myself and my 2 brothers. So 4 boys, 1 little girl come down steps. There's 4 employees working that night and we go 5 different directions.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah, we were.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They couldn't yell at us because our grandfathers were upstairs and our grandfathers would come down and yell at them. So
Yeah. Well, Randi, I want to really thank you for your expertise in sharing this. I want to wrap by asking you, going back to the specifically funeral business, but for all of us listening, and I'm asking for myself too, is how can people start the conversation with loved ones or be present to it themselves about how to make this process as, I don't know what the word is, like what can we all do to make this process as, I guess, I don't know, peaceful or as, I would say as smooth as can be possible so that when our time comes or the time comes for us to have to plan a funeral, that it's just, you can really focus on the appreciation and the grieving and not have to worry about running around and getting numbers or worrying about clothing, like the details that, like what can people do? Like, and maybe there's some best practice here. I'm sure you see families that have done this. I'm sure they show up and hey, like we've had the conversation with Dad. He's in hospice. This is what he wants. And then I'm sure you've seen the opposite. And I'm talking about where people know, like they're in hospice or something. And I'm sure you've seen the opposite where people are in hospice, they're terminal and they don't do anything. So what would you recommend?
So there's a couple of different approaches depending on what the situation is. I think the last one you said, when someone's on hospice and it's imminent, families call us, and what we try and do is at that moment, if they're able to, we try and get all the information ahead of time that we're going to need, like the death certificate. We'll ask some questions.
Yeah.
And we'll find out what cemetery or what their wishes are and that stuff. We basically pre-plan it, but without doing it for a future date. It's going to happen later.
So you're like starting the file and everything. You've got like the paperwork. You just don't know the actual date. Yeah. Okay.
So, there's 2 other ways of doing what we call a pre-arrangement. So people come into us and they want to pre-arrange for themselves. Let's say they're in their like mid-50s up to early 80s, but they're healthy. There's nothing going on. They just decide that we want to come in and plan our funerals. One of the things after we go through all the steps and basically we plan their funeral for when it will happen down the road, I say to them, please make sure that a family member knows that you've done this or an executor or, POA, because, they should know. And they'll say to me, well, my kids don't want to know. And I said, well, they're going to have to know because it's inevitable. And just help me take care of everything. All they have to do is make 1 phone call.
Yeah.
That's kind of an easier way to do it. when we have children calling and saying, like, we want to prearrange for mom and dad, they're getting up in years, they're fine, but we want to kind of start the ball rolling, or they're moving into like a nursing home or, assisted living type thing.
Yeah.
They're like, we don't know how to broach the subject with our loved ones. And I said, well,
Sure.
there's an easy way to do it. It's never easy, but here's an easier way to do it. Hey, have you guys thought about, where you want to be buried?
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like a neutral question, and then they can say, well, no, we don't want to be buried, we want to be cremated. Okay, well, now I know that. Or, yes, we own ground at. And then you can say to them, well, if that's the case, why don't we start taking care of stuff? We can lock in today's price for future use. That's like that their parent died, and they know it's been prearranged, and they tell us that it's a prearranged funeral, and we pull the file and we go through it, either at the time that we're going over the arrangement or at the time of the funeral. 9 out of 10 of us say, thank God mom and dad did this and made it so easy.
Totally. I can imagine.
Well, we basically tell people it's a gift. It's a gift to your family. Well, they know your wishes.
Yeah.
Forget about the financial burden, and we have all the information.
Yeah.
And it's that we'll go over it with you. We'll go over the fine details, obviously, but for the most part, it's done. And it just makes it easier because you know what? When someone dies, whether it's expected or unexpected, it's heartbreaking. It's difficult.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, I mean, like the message there, I think it's just there are just things that you shouldn't avoid.
Death and taxes, they're always going to be there.
Death and taxes. One puts you in jail, one you're gone. Yeah, I'll give my parents a shout out. They've told us exactly we want to be cremated. This is what we want, which is really, I mean, and my brother and sister and I, we all get along great. So we're one of the few brother and sister combos, brother sister combos. I don't think any of us really have any issues, but when that time comes, and God willing, it won't be for a long time, is we kind of know what's up.
You know what? You're very lucky because
it's a gift, huge gift.
Well, and also dealing with families where there's discourse, where they don't always get along or see eye to eye. The other thing that happens is, in our religion anyway, as a Jewish person, you end up with one family member, it could be a cousin, a sibling, whatever, that becomes ultra religious.
Yep.
And that upsets the apple cart sometimes, because they try and push their way on people versus how the person lived their life while they were living. So, sometimes the family acquiesces and does what the religious person wants, and sometimes they fight back, and we go, let us know which way we're going.
Yeah, we're not getting involved. You tell us. You're our client. You tell us. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't get involved with family issues in that respect. We'll guide you, we'll help you, but you tell us that you don't want your brother back in the family room before the service. We'll tell him that, but he's allowed in the building. Yeah. If something should come into play, like there's a fight or something, we don't get involved. We'll step away. We'll call police if it gets out of hand, but we're not. Yeah. We can't be involved because the minute we get involved, we're in trouble.
Yeah,
it's our fault. So it's and you referee a lot of families, unfortunately.
I'm sure. Randy, I want to leave on a little bit of a lighter note and ask if you saw the story of the woman. I think it was in Uruguay. They were burying her and she wasn't dead.
No, but I heard there was someone else that they thought was dead and she woke up in the carnival. Yeah.
Well, this one, I saw this. This is not like a fake story. This, I think, saw it on CNN. They thought she'd passed. She was older. She was in the coffin, and then she was knocking on the coffin. She's knocking at the coffin at the service. They hoping she was alive. I'm like, that is so crazy.
Well, when I first started taking out funerals, I was driving a hearse and I was getting ready to go to the cemetery. My dad says, if the guy in the back changed the radio station, get out of the car.
Yeah. Either you're in a very supernatural condition or we made a huge mistake. Either way, this is a big problem.
I would love to know how that could even possibly happen in this day and age in 2023, how they would not know she wasn't dead.
Yeah, how would you not know? Check her pulse, see if she's breathing. Can you hear her breathe? It seems like maybe it happened in a place where maybe the medical wasn't a high level of medical care.
Come on, the body's not cold.
I know. Who
You know,
knows?
blood pumping makes the body warm. Like, you know, like there's,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Well, good for her. Good for her and good for her family, I guess. Well, Randi, I want to thank you so much for being on. It was really a pleasure to get to know you. Congratulations on the family business. That, like we talked about, that is not no small feat. And for the good work you do for the families you support, and look forward to having you back on again sometime soon. Have a great rest of your Friday and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Randi.
Take care, Jason.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.